Night City is full of utterly terrible people, and in this video we're looking into the most despicable, worst of the worst piece of human trash who you probably met without realizing. And I'm not talking about this guy, or that one, or her. No, today is all about Jotaro Shobo, a high-level member of the Tiger Claws with a huge underlying business operation producing some of the most screwed up brain dances money can buy. His reputation strikes terror into the hearts of plenty, and although our encounter is only brief, Jotaro's influence runs far and wide across Night City. So sit back and relax as we delve into the workings of Jotaro's BD business, turning over every detail to prove just why this man is the most evil character in Cyberpunk 2077. Whilst Jotaro is, first and foremost, a street-level Tiger Claw boss with standard business duties, the evil deeds that stand out with him all stem back to the illegal recording and distribution of very dark XBDs around Night City. We'll look a little more into the extremely screwed up nature of these a bit later in the video, but first let's start at the beginning. Brain dances in the world of Cyberpunk are basically the next step up from movies or even VR, with BD recording equipment capturing both the thoughts and feelings of the person scrolling. Experiencing a BD then is pretty much entirely literal in its meaning. You are getting to relive the full sensory, psychological, and emotional experience of the scroller at the time of recording. At least that's how it would feel before editing. Indeed, much like media today, BDs are trimmed and tweaked a whole bunch to deliver a more streamlined and less cluttered experience. Editors like Judy make a living rifling through this stuff, trimming out bloats like irrelevant thoughts or sensory data such as smells that could make for an unpleasant experience. However, in a shard entitled Relive.it Braindance Quarterly, we can read a short essay on the increasing popularity of black market extreme brain dances, or XBDs, where screwed up individuals will often scroll extreme experiences like real death or torture in continually more creative and radical forms. And due to the emotionally stimulating nature, the amounts a person would feel going through such trauma, these sorts of BDs can become intoxicatingly addictive, with consumers craving more and more extreme content to keep on hitting the same highs. Kind of like any other addiction, really. Anyway, the article ponders whether XBDs are particularly alluring due to the explicit content, or whether it's more down to the raw, unfiltered nature of the experience. Regardless of which it is, it's pretty clear that there's a hefty demand for this content out there, with millions of people crammed into tiny mega-building apartments forced to work 80 hours a week minimum just to stay in the rat race. Escapism media is even more prevalent than today, and this lays the groundwork for Jotaro's little XBD business to utterly flourish. In a city tingling with demand for the extreme, those with the means of supply can make an utter killing through killing and other worse stuff. But of course, the braindance market, especially XBDs, is not about convincing theatre. People want the real thing. Real thoughts, real pain, real death. And for that, Shobo needs continual imports of unwilling participants. There's a number of gigs, scanner hustles, and hidden gems, all of which come together to paint a very broad picture of just how far this operation goes. Jotaro's biggest supplier then, but not his only one, is a man evil enough to warrant his own assassination gig right alongside Shobo himself. In fact, the hit on Jae-hyun is commissioned after Jotaro, but let's delve into him first to follow the supply chain chronologically. The scavengers exist all over Night City, creepy thugs in LED gimp masks known for kidnapping people and selling on their valuables. And by valuables, I mean usually their cyberware and organs. They may seem like scattered groups consisting of the lowest of the low, but in actuality, these isolated cadres more each serve as links in a web, underpinning the entirety of Night City and Dogtown, catching anyone unfortunate enough to fall in. And this is fundamentally how Jae-hyun's business runs, with his people targeting the lowest hanging fruit. Nobodies who've come to Night City completely alone, with no friends or family to watch their back, known in this case as UPs, or unreal people. Fresh faces, usually, who often become targets for Jae-hyun and eventually Jotaro the second they cross the Night City border. It's no secret that the majority of NC's police department aren't adverse to taking bribes from criminals, but the car we find just a few hundred yards down from the crossing shows it's actually far worse than that. M. Bell and D. Declan, both officers of the Southern California Border Patrol, are not only being paid to turn a blind eye to these kidnappings, but it's literally their job to single out vulnerable newcomers who aren't going to to be missed, though Bell at least got what was coming to him, after taking a particular liking to some nomad girl and driving her into the wilderness to spend some quote-unquote quality time together, underestimating the resourcefulness of nomads, which resulted in him dying in a pool of his own blood, where we find him. But what would have happened if Bell had followed procedure? Well, that's a breadcrumb trail we can follow in its entirety. Down in Wellsprings is an assault in progress involving a group of scavs and one David Beamer, who's in direct contact with Border Patrol. On his body is a convo with Jotaro's main supplier, Jae-Hyun. David is part of the operation to secure Unreal people, and can be seen here sending their names and files on for assessments. Cindy Lather, John Kaczmarek, and Sherry Bach are all names that'll come up in just a moment, but first, there's a little more to how this all runs, and why nobody is investigating this operation. Also, at the scene is a convo between two other cops named Wesley and Nina, with Wesley having discovered David's little deal with Jae-Hyun. But rather than reporting his colleague, Wesley notices an opportunity to score some scratch for himself, conspiring to demand from David a cut of the proceeds. How does this go for him? Well, who do you think David is pointing his gun at when we stumble on this crime scene? It seems, backed up by his scav tombs, David is trying to figure out what to do with his out-of-line colleague, but thanks to us, he won't ever get to make that decision. That said, not all cops are as gonk-brained as Wesley, and under the end of the Wellsprings Pier, climbing over this fence, is a similar encounter that turned out quite a bit different, where a cop named Jacob Miller has been investigating a number of disappearing women who were all last seen getting into patrol cars, part of the same operation to ferry away newcomers to Jotaro. Jacob was able to trace these disappearances to one Callum Black, contacting him with the simple threats of knowing all. It's already clear to us that this whole operation has a lot of depth, but Callum warns that not even he knew at first the true extent of it all, begging Jacob to let it go because Jotaro will literally kill him. Interestingly, we also learn that Jacob's investigation is getting tossed in the trash for some reason. Clearly not something the NCPD want to deal with, as the Tiger Claws are simply too powerful and numerous of a gang to go up against. Though Jacob does at least deal with Callum, luring him to this secluded spot and flatlining this human trafficking piece of trash. Hardly a dent in the operation that no doubt barely needed filling. For those unfortunate enough to be caught at the border then, they get sent to Jae-Hyun, housed in the elevated slums of Kabuki, trading off humans like cattle, the details of which can be found on the guy's laptop. Remember the three names from David Beamer's shard? Well, they're on the files here, and clearly follow the same pattern of being outsiders who are low risk enough to be able to kidnap. Horrifically, one nomad runaway, one orphan from Nevada, and another homeless orphan living on the streets just around here. 17, 19, and 24 years old, respectively. Practically children swept up by unfortunate circumstance and traded into a life of abject terror. Hyun then hits up Jotaro with his goods, and the wording of this email is also highly disturbing, describing his victims as, quote, one black lamb, two pink porky boys, and with an Asian twist, a young hen and a rooster, end quote, explaining that they're dying to perform in Jotaro's productions, that's a literal statement no doubt, and that they're now his property, fitted with GPS trackers should they have the gall to try and escape. In reply, Jotaro merely expresses hope that they'll survive the trials he has in store, something it seems the previous batch weren't so good at doing, referring to these people merely as ingredients through which he cooks his abhorrent but apparently addictive XBDs. The final email shows that Jotaro isn't Jae-Hyun's only client, but he is the most important one, and after one of their victims suffers a seizure, rendering him too weak to star in an XBD, Jae-Hyun swaps him for another kid, originally planned to be traded off to a downtown corpo. No idea who, but the fact that Jotaro's needs, a ganger, are being placed above that of a corpo shows that A, Jotaro instills fear amidst the other Kabuki criminals, and B, he's definitely a profitable customer. So that's the border smuggling operation, where Jotaro procures most of his supply, but not all. And there's two other instances I found of people getting trafficked by or for Jotaro. The first is mentioned in a Haywood gig, which I go through all the details of in this video, but of particular relevance here is this shard, looted during Senor Ladrillo's private collection at the Dicky Twister Club. Two of the guards, Lena and Otis, are discussing the disappearance of a colleague named Steve, who went missing days ago after going to meet Jotaro with the hope of earning more eddies than he is here. That was the last time anyone heard from him. And my best guess is that losing some of the people supplied by Jae-Hyun threw a spanner in the works. So so, Jotaro resorted to enticing other gangers with the promise of more pay, and this Valentino fell right into the trap. The other, more screwed up encounter can be found in Kabuki, where an assortment of scavs and tiger claws are gathered around a pile of shipping containers. An operation headed up by Peter Upman, whom we can read is also in contact with Jotaro. 3 guesses for what's inside the container. Yep, more people for Jotaro to screw about with. These ones, it seems, are shipped in from outside NC, going by the archived convo, which also serves once again as a demonstration of Jotaro exercising the raw fear that he can instill in people, acting offended towards Peter to mess with him and probably scare the guy a little. Fortunately, this batch of trafficked innocents at least can be let out of their cage, after disturbingly and incessantly bashing against the walls to let us know they're there. They immediately flee and hopefully find a way back to their lives. Well, all of them except Tracy, who, for one reason or another, didn't survive this ordeal. Merely kidnapped from a friend's party, she tried to get help by contacting her mother, but to no avail. Clearly, it's not just nobodies that Jotaro steals for his twisted endeavors, but rather anyone he can get his hands on that he thinks can survive the XBD shoots. Of course, these operations aren't purely down to him, but he is a very big-name buyer of trafficked people that heavily supplements the business. That, in itself, is evil enough, but the production side is a whole nother ballgame. Jotaro Shobo bases himself down in Kabuki at a place called the Ho-Oh Club, a 3-story building whose name refers to the Chinese fengguang bird, also known as a phoenix. It's ironic, given such a bird is supposed to represent grace and virtue. And perhaps I'm stretching a bit here, but maybe virtue in this context could be taken as a reference to the other term for BDs, which are also often referred to as virtues. Anyway, the ground floor consists of Jotaro's more legitimate operation, a casino open to the public where we can even order a drink and ask this.
I want to have a word with Jotaro.
You have a death wish?
Some people say so.
Leave a while you still can. Trust me.
That's a pretty knowing warning from the bartender right there, and indeed, should some gonk from the street wander into Jotaro's lair, they'd no doubt be treated as another easily acquired XBD Production resource. The second floor then is more of a Tiger's exclusive lounge, a place, no doubt, for Jotaro to facilitate his more traditional gang operations. As a member of the Claws, he still has day-to-day responsibilities and tribute money to pay to the leaders at the top. And before we get to the XBD shoots, let's first look at another string to this man's evil. Further encounters suggest that he also inhabits the more classic gang role of traditional pimp. On a shard found at the Shinto shrine up in North Oak, a couple Tigers discuss hitting the city and are drooling over pictures of quote-unquote Jotaro's new girls. Nothing too out of the ordinary yet, though the Mox's gang do exist to protect sex workers. So pretty clear why they don't get along with the Tiger faction, especially Jotaro. An assault in progress near the Kabuki roundabouts shows just how Jotaro treats people who try to leave his employ. Kiko was one such girl unfortunate enough to wind up with such a life. Perhaps she was another victim, swept up off the streets by Jae-hyun or Border Patrol. Either way, she had a tracker installed and was forced into work. Until one day a Tiger named Jake fell for her and resorted to the two of them running away together, convincing a Ripper to rip the tracker out, but only by not mentioning Jotaro. Barely anyone, it seems, has the guts to cross this guy. When Jotaro finds out this has happened though, he's utterly furious, shown by the fact that he's using all block capitals in this text convo. And merely to prove a point, Jotaro orders Kiko and Jake to be tracked down and publicly executed, making everyone else think twice before following suit and protecting his more traditional business assets from running away. As for the Ripper who helped, Jotaro eventually opts for bribery, ensuring any other prospective runaways will instead get ratted on. Not only is this guy utterly evil then, but he's also dangerously level-headed. All of this merely informs us that operations on the 3rd floor of Ho-Oh, the BD studio, are conducted not out of necessity. Shobo already runs a successful gang operation, so rather these more despicable actions are made out of choice, want, and a desire to inflict immensely twisted suffering on some in order to supplement the sick wants of others. Of course, the brokenness of society as a whole is what enables enables his success, but that in no way alleviates him from being a despicable human being. And with a detailed rummage around this place, we see just how passionate he is to bring to life his really screwed up ideas. On one email is a long equipment order, which gets progressively worse as we go through, starting off pretty tame with handcuffs, but going on to include a cage, electrodes, an aquarium, a full suite ambulance, and more. Already, we can see that there's no dark corners this man's mind won't go to, and he knows exactly how evil he is, as he orders no data to be logged on his floor and dampers to be set up so nobody knows what's going on. Unfortunately for him, these measures weren't enough to prevent Mock's netrunners from tracking him down, and one thing CDPR games have a habit of doing is taking scary, evil monsters and showing that they're far from invincible thanks to protagonists like Geralt and now V. But we'll come back to this later. Looking at the files, we can see Jotaro produced 6 XBDs in the previous month, and looking around the studio, we get some idea about what they entailed. Firstly, an operating table complete with scalpels and surgical equipment, a pile of blood beside it, then a metal grate with lights and another pool of blood, before an actual human body carved open with a ceremonial knife, and the most disturbing central item is a bloodied double bed, illuminated like a brothel with industrial chain hooks hanging from the ceiling. Scenes all born from the mind of Jotaro and set up by him. Now, knowing what we know about the types of vulnerable people kidnapped, isolated, and usually pretty young, it only serves to paint a more terrible and disturbing picture. We also know that Jotaro put in a custom order at a katana manufacturing plant in Japantown, requesting a Surgeon Fallistiff or BFC 9000 equivalent that's also shaped like a katana. Not sharp, he says, but just shaped like one, no doubt for another screwed up BD idea. Now, if I haven't already convinced you that Jotaro is the most evil character, then look no further than his personal file of notes, ideas, and inspirations, involving things like binding two people together and forcing them to do things, capturing mostly feelings of guilt and disgust, but also hoping to tap into an underlying glimmer of grotesque pleasure. And the second idea is just as evil, involving linking two people's optics together to capture combined feelings of a participant and an observer, then forcing the participant to do things to somebody the observer cares about deeply, and then capture the distraught feelings of both, with Jotaro's only concern for this one being the practicalities of setting it up. And to be honest, I don't even know what's worse, the fact that Jotaro comes up with these and has the follow-through to put them into action, or the fact that there's a pretty big market out there for this kind of stuff. So much so that Jotaro isn't even the only one making a big living from this, far from it. In another email titled Expectations, Jotaro is speaking with his distributor, Lenny Nero, whom we'll look at a little more later. Here though, Shobo is discussing the mundanity that he thinks his ideas now have. Things like torture and mutilation have become far too vanilla for him, encouraging the man to delve ever deeper into the revolting and depraved. And Lenny merely encourages him to keep pushing it further, creating experiences so evil that customers won't know what to expect and they'll keep craving that mystery. Now, put the nature of the content aside for a second, and to be fair, it's a pretty good business model, knowing what your audience wants and delivering them a fair balance of similar but different. It just so happens that in this case, creating that usually results in the overly creative torture and eventual death of multiple innocent victims. And what does Jotaro do with the bodies? Well, looks like he has something of a cushy deal going with the Valentinos, who simply take them away to be burned at the La Catrina crematorium. Not that Jotaro cares about any of that. To him, they are merely tools to be carelessly discarded after serving their use. This guy clearly has no remorse and simply lives to make the world a worse place with his ideas. His content is lapped up by uncomfortably numerous masses, and his reputation strikes fear into the hearts of many. So let's take a closer look at his wider influence. It's pretty clear by this point that Jotaro is a hugely feared presence in Watson, but there's still a couple people either brave or stupid enough to try and go against him. A prominent one is Evan Flakes, who worked at the Kabuki markets, probably as a Tiger Claw, but either way had insights into Jotaro's business. The cop, Anna Hamill, whom we meet in the Woman of La Mancha gig, is one of the few people actually concerned and actively attempting to dismantle Jotaro's massive human trafficking and XBD production ring. and one of her plans involves securing testimony from Evan to strengthen her case, for which she promises him protection. A promise that, when push comes to shove, she actually can't make happen. Again, going to show that the NCPD, as an organization, both can't and won't do anything about Jotaro. And outside of the occasional do-gooder like Anna, they're all too happy to look the other way. So much so, in fact, that Anna's fellow officers put out a hit on her to protect their own selfish interests. But that's another story discussed and timestamped in this video. As for Evan, upon learning that he won't get any protection, he's instructed by a relative of his, Martha, to flee to the port in Wellsprings. Disappearing is literally the only hope anyone has against a wrathful Jotaro. But whilst he himself may have gotten to safety, Jotaro's next move was to put out hits on the rest of his family, making it, much like with Kiko, a spectacle for everyone to see. I don't know who the guy in the chair was when we find this scene, but presumably it's a friend or relative of Evan's. Again, Jotaro's response to anyone who goes against him is deliberately so extreme that it's meant to serve as a big tale of woe against anyone who might consider doing the same. So, the NCPD have no interest in stopping him, individuals are too terrified and powerless to stand against his forces, and all in all, Jotaro Shobo seems like a cruel, untouchable villain with depraved appetites and a seriously twisted mind, earning him the name the Devil of Kabuki. In the end though, Shobo fell by the hands of one very talented merc, V, who single-handedly infiltrated the Ho-Oh Club, reached Shobo one way or another, and either dropped him there and then, or knocked him out and carted him away for the mocks to exact their revenge. After all, street-level desperate sex workers are who the gang exists to protect, though they're also easy pickings for Shobo. It was only a matter of time before the two factions came to blows. But, just like that, a snake slithering through most of Night City has its head swiftly cut off. But in his place is left a thought for the other gang leaders of Night City. If a man with such a terrifying reputation could become such easy prey for one individual, then how powerful must that person be? Well, to be fair, the other things we go on to do are pretty impressive, but even just this earns us plenty of street cred. And as you may be aware, dealing with Jotaro through the Monster Hunt gig before heading to Clouds does unlock an additional dialogue with Woodman.
Clouds is under Tiger Claw control, isn't it?
It's none of your fucking biz.
Guessing you heard about Jotaro Shobo?
Shobo had an accident.
What Shobo had was a very unfortunate meeting with me. Just happened to be his last. Wouldn't want this to be your last meeting, would ya?
Of course not. Never wanted to be anything like Shobo.
Now, Woodman is generally fairly unfazed, though definitely also a very scummy person, but mentioning Shobo is one of the quickest ways to get him to cooperate. Woodman doesn't show it, but realizing what we single-handedly managed to do does scare him. No doubt, Jotaro, through reputation alone, terrified Woodman also, and for all the awful things he's done, he still admits never wanting to be anything like Shobo. So, to understand more about Jotaro's business and wider influence, we next need to look at Lenny Nero, a back alley XBD dealer housed under Jig Street, peddling all kinds of screwed up virtues. Not just from Shobo, but also the Scavs, which ties in with the Disaster Piece quest to find Evelyn, as well as Gottfried and Frederick Person. The awful father-son XBD editing duo met during the Dirty Biz gig, though actually he does cut ties with those two as he doesn't like that Gottfried is dragging his son into the business. Quite how that qualifies as taking it too far and all of Jotaro's stuff doesn't is a little beyond me, but maybe Lenny doesn't entirely know the background of supply for Jotaro's business. Either way, most of you also agree that Jotaro is more evil than Gottfried. If you do want to learn more about that awful father and son though, then check out chapter 2 of my Disturbing Quests video. Back to Lenny though, and the first time we meet him, we can watch this deal taking place.
Looking for something raw, untouched.
Raw's all you get with me. What's your edge?
Want something that'll floor me, really scramble the neurons.
We've got it all, man. Bare knuckle boxing, shootouts, black ops interrogations, amputations.
No. I mean, something like, well, you know.
Fetishes?
No, come on, you know what I mean?
No, I don't. Think I'd be doing this job if I could read minds?
I want to know what it's like to kill somebody.
See, wasn't so hard. So, got some classics from the last Corp War, or armed robbery if you're looking for something fresher.
For the Disaster Piece quest, we'll actually have to acquire a product from Lenny ourselves as well, first tracking him down by hacking a nearby terminal to find there's actually a number of distributors based around Jig Street, of which Lenny is merely one, and acquiring the required XBD from him via legitimate purchase. We'll also see in his vendor inventory plenty of other horrific BD titles. No way of knowing which came from Shobo, of course, but all this does speak to a wider point to be made here. Jotaro is not the only person in Night City doing this, nor is it just a trio of him, Gottfried, and a band of scavs. Now, there's a cut content chart in the game file still, with two people discussing the death of Jotaro. Traffickers, it seems, who are pissed off at losing such a big customer. Whether or not it's actually canon in any way now doesn't matter, because the final lines are true regardless. Quote, "But this town's full of Jotaros. I'm sure he won't be hard to replace." End quote. So, is Jotaro Shobo really the most evil character in Cyberpunk 2077? Well, yes, or at least the most evil character that we come across. One thing I love about this game is how V doesn't feel like the centerpiece of this world, but rather a tiny part of it, and our exposure to characters like Jotaro and Gottfried are merely meant to serve as a taste into the darkest recesses of Night City, recesses that are made all the more scary by not quite knowing how deep they really go. So yes, there might be some more screwed up BD creator out there, more twisted than this man. But for the sheer amount of exposition of him littered throughout the game, the evil web of influence this man cast across Night City, Jotaro Shobo is an utterly abominable, yet often overlooked side character. And next time you take on the Monster Hunt gig, hopefully it will hit a little different, knowing just how big of an evil deal this guy is. But comment below whether you think there's someone worse out there than Jotaro, and who knows, maybe they'll get a video too somewhere. Massive thank you to the patrons as always for keeping the channel alive. Check that out in the description. I'm Bram, thank you for watching and see you in the next one.